for accepting the suggestion. I welcome us back from the coffee break. And I want to say that a lot has been said on the topic of this gathering, the summit. I don't want to repeat what we have spoken about all through yesterday. We've spoken extensively about the dangers and the epidemic. And we have also today listened to the delegates from Nigeria. So more or less, we have the same laws and regulations and the same challenges in that climb. I will call human trafficking an epidemic hidden in plain sight. We see it, but it appears as if it is also disappearing. I will also just say briefly that Nigeria is a source, transit, and destination country for women and children subjected to forced labor and sex trafficking. Most of these victims are recruited from rural and to a lesser extent urban areas, because it is expected that in the urban areas there is more awareness, but in the rural areas they don't have enough awareness, they are poor, and they are looking for sustenance. I joked earlier on to a colleague of mine in the morning. I said, why don't we arrest Mr. Poverty? We have prosecutors here to prosecute him, and we have judges here to issue the warrant on poverty, so that at least we can have some peace in Africa in relation to Mr. Poverty. But going more on a serious note, I have stated that women and girls are recruited for domestic servitude and sex trafficking, and boys for forced labor in street vending, domestic services, mining, stone quarrying, agriculture, textile manufacturing, and begging. Nigerian women and children are taken from Nigeria to other West and Central African countries, as well as to South Africa, where they are exploited for the same purpose, as well as subjected to sex trafficking throughout Europe, recruited and transported to destinations in North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia, where they are held captive in the commercial sex industry and forced labor. We've heard recently of the Nigerian experience in Libya. And as last month, one of the journalists in Nigeria released a book. That book is titled From Fry Pan to Fire. I think we, in Africa, when you say you are going from fry pan to fire, we know what that means. Living, maybe it may not be so rosy. You think you are going to look for greener pasture, but you are going into the depth of crisis. And he released that book last month. He captured the essence of the Libya experience. I stated here that, excuse me, Nigeria is also a transit point for children from other countries in West Africa. We've heard about how we have a lot of children from Togo and Benin Republic being brought to Nigeria and used as house staff. Young children in internally displaced persons, IDP camps, are not exempted, just like my colleague Binta has stated. And somebody has also mentioned the scourge of Boko Haram in northeastern Nigeria. They are employed as young as 12 years old to do the battle. Government of Nigeria is making significant efforts to curb trafficking in human persons, and it has sustained strong anti-trafficking law enforcement efforts by investigating, prosecuting, and convicting numerous traffickers. We have also in Nigeria collaborated with 11 countries on international investigations, and by providing extensive specialized anti-trafficking training to officials from various government ministries and agencies. The National Agency for the Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons and Other Related Matters, NAPTIP, received a larger operating budget, identifies and provides services to a large number of victims, and continues extensive awareness campaigns throughout Nigeria. A colleague of mine, Justice Chikere, spoke about the amendments to the law. I will not talk more about that because it's already before us here. And I go on to say the government also collaborated with law enforcement agencies from Belgium, Burkina Faso, Finland, France, Germany, Mali, Norway, Sweden, Taiwan, the United Kingdom, and the United States on 43 investigations involving Nigerian nationals during the reported period, and said NAPTIP, in collaboration with international partners, provided specialized training to approximately 228 government employees, including judges, prosecutors, and officials from NAPTIP, the Nigerian Police Force, and the Nigerian Immigration Services. These programs offer specialized training on victim identification, investigation and prosecution of trafficking cases, counseling, intelligence collection, and monitoring and evaluation. The government maintains strong effort to protect trafficking victims. The government identified 943 trafficking victims, including 429 victims of sex trafficking and 514 of labor trafficking, compared with 914 victims identified in the previous reporting period, that is between 2015 to 2018. And NAPTIP provided initial screening and assistance for all victims it identified and referred them to government-run care facilities for further medical care, vocational training, education, and shelter. NAPTIP operated 9 shelters specifically for trafficking victims with a total capacity of 313 victims. Through these shelters, NAPTIP provided access to legal, medical, and psychological services, as well as vocational training, trade and financial empowerment, and business management skills. Victims who required additional medical and psychological treatment were provided services by hospitals and clinics through existing agreement with NAPTIP. NAPTIP shelters offered short-term care, generally limiting victims' stay to 6 weeks, although victims were allowed to extend their stays under special circumstances. If victims needed longer-term care, NAPTIP collaborated with 2 shelters operated by the Ministry of Women Affairs and NGO-run shelters. I am a member of the Board of Trustees for one of these NGOs called HELP. It's a Nigerian NGO based in England, but they work in conjunction with NAPTIP in Nigeria, particularly people that are there trying to move from one stage of their life to the next. Nigerian authorities ensured identified trafficking victims were not penalized for unlawful acts committed as a result of being subjected to trafficking. All victims were eligible to receive funds from the Victims Trust Fund, which is being financed primarily through confiscated assets of convicted traffickers. I don't need to go to the fact that trafficking is a global and transborder menace. I will just go to the conclusions that I reached. My paper has been submitted already. I'll just go to the conclusions and recommendations. To kill the monster of human trafficking and organized crime as concerns trafficking, cooperation between government and non-governmental organizations will play a significant role in addressing the multifaceted social problem and economic pandemic. While there are no silver bullets to solving the worldwide trafficking problem, a globalizing world, government accountability, and new technology can help curb this menace to society. The government has to shrewdly enforce existing laws and policies to properly and effectively combat the menace of human trafficking. The business sector also has the responsibility to ensure clean supply chains, while NGOs have to promote awareness and provide assistance in protecting, rescuing, and reintegrating victims. Let us not forget every citizen has a role to play in the campaign against trafficking. Government, the public and private sectors have to cease provision of financial and in-kind support to groups recruiting and using children. Investigate and prosecute all individuals suspected of recruiting and using child soldiers and allegedly perpetrating other trafficking abuses against women and children. Continue to vigorously pursue trafficking investigations, prosecutions, and adequate sentences for convicted traffickers. Take proactive measures to investigate and prosecute government officials suspected of trafficking-related corruption and complicity in trafficking offenses. Ensure the activities of anti-trafficking bodies receive sufficient funding, particularly for prosecuting traffickers, and provide adequate care for victims. Implement programs for the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of former child combatants that take into account the specific needs of child ex-combatants. Continue to provide regular training to police and immigration officials to identify trafficking victims among vulnerable populations, such as women in prostitution and young females traveling with non-family members. Fully integrate anti-trafficking responsibilities into the work of the police force and the ministries of labor, and continue to increase the capacity of various embassies to identify and provide assistance to victims abroad, including through regular and specialized training for diplomatic and consular personnel. We must be alert. If you see anything that you think might be related to trafficking, tell the police or telephone your local anti-trafficking helpline if one is available. You must be involved. Find out what is being done to prevent human trafficking in your community. See what you can do and encourage your friends, families, and neighbors to be more aware about human trafficking. Join the UNODC-led Blue Heart campaign against human trafficking by visiting www.unodc.org/blueheart. Help spread the word through your social media networks, or make a donation to the United Nations Trust Fund for Victims of Human Trafficking. Make sure that your consumer choices and actions are ethical ones, e.g. choose not to purchase goods and services that could be linked directly or indirectly with sexual exploitation, forced labor, or other forms of forced subjugation. We can make a difference in the fight against labor trafficking and labor exploitation by passing laws, and as judges, let us make proactive orders. Don't let us make orders that will not have any effect on what we are fighting or the menace we are fighting. Make orders that can be orders that can be obeyed, and sanctions that can be applied and obeyed. We can go into partnerships with the Freedom Fund, support almost 100 partners around the world doing grassroots work to fight modern slavery. No, I'm talking about the Freedom Fund, a philanthropy focused on strategic planning and financing, has supported almost 100 partners around the world doing grassroots work to fight modern slavery. Their mission is to identify and invest in the best effort that allow local entities to thrive. You can look into that. Policymakers also have to take greater action, both in understanding the problem and in crafting legislative solutions. Our collective hope is to increase collaboration and to work in parallel on the crucial areas. Finally, I stated here that technology has reached an advanced stage. We can have hotels fixed with traffic cam. There's one that there's an app called Traffic Cam. This can be used in hotels to monitor and see what is happening. There's another one, Labor Voices, provides real-time crowdsourcing of factory sites so workers can report conditions. I've spoken at length about judges. I want to end by stating in Proverbs 31:8-9, open your mouth for the mute, for the right of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the right of the poor and needy. And I quote Ezekiel 34:16, I will seek the lost, and I will bring back the straight, and I will bind up the injured, and I will strengthen the weak, and the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them in justice. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present this paper, and I want to thank His Holiness, as well as the Pontifical Academies of Science and Social Sciences for giving us the opportunity to be here and present our thoughts on this scourging menace. Thank you very much.